Good afternoon. Appreciate all the interest of you all showing up here to cover this. This is the day that the South Carolina Compassionate Care Act got read across the desk in the Senate. It is Senate Bill 366. I have been assured by the Medical Affairs Committee Chairman, Danny Verdon, that it is going to get a subcommittee hearing with the intention that it get a full committee hearing, with the full intention that it get to the House and the Senate floor, both bodies, this year, so that representatives in the House and senators in the Senate can cast a vote on this up or down, one way or the other. I do think this is the year that we're going to see this particular bill get over the finish line. And let me tell you why I think that. This is not a green bill, it's a mature bill. This is a bill that's undergone 4 years' worth of subcommittee processes. It's undergone hundreds of hours of testimony. It's had every legislator that was interested in this bill weighing in and having their suggestions incorporated. It is, I am confident to say, the most strictly regulated, socially conservative medical cannabis bill in the United States. And that's what Governor McMaster will be signing later this year. Now, why is it that? Why is this the most strictly regulated, most socially conservative medical cannabis bill in the country? Well, quite simply, it's because that's what South Carolinians want. Over the last 3 years, there have been numerous polls done, and each one of those polls, without exception, shows that between 70 to 80% of South Carolinians want cannabis to be available if a physician believes it's in the patient's best interest. But what those polls also show is that an equal percentage of South Carolinians do not want cannabis to be used recreationally. Now, we represent the people of South Carolina, and our job, or my job, and the job of those behind me, is to present a bill and to get a bill passed that is reflective of South Carolinians' values. Let me tell you why this is the most conservative, yet compassionate cannabis law in the country. Unlike other states, we have a very tightly defined universe of qualifying conditions. It's not open-ended. They are specific conditions that are spelled out in the bill for which there is medical science and proof that cannabis can be an effective treatment for. Second of all, the bill is predicated upon physician supervision and authorization. Nothing takes place whatsoever in regard to cannabis unless a physician sitting down with a patient and making an in-person diagnosis concludes that that cannabis could be of medicinal benefit to that patient. This is all about empowering doctors. It's all about giving them this particular option to treat their patients. It's about doctors and patients deciding what's in that patient's best interest, not politicians, not law enforcement, nobody but that patient and that doctor sitting down and deciding what is in that patient's best interest. And to me, that's at the core of being conservative. That's at the core of being limited government, of getting government out of people's lives and letting them make decisions that are in their own best interest, in this case, in consultation with a physician. Another reason why this bill is the most conservative medical cannabis bill in the country. Each step of the process, from the growing to the processing to the dispensing, is monitored in real time, constantly, by DHEC and SLED. That is built into this bill. There is also a requirement that medical cannabis establishments, whether a grower or a processor or a dispenser, maintain seed-to-sale tracking technology so that DHEC and SLED know at any time exactly where cannabis is in the process. This bill also makes it a felony, punishable by a $5,000 fine, up to 5 years in jail, or both, if you divert medical cannabis for recreational use. Now, all of these things aren't going to make a lot of people happy. They're going to think it's too restrictive. They're going to think that it involves government too much in people's lives. But again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. This is a bill that is reflective of what South Carolinians want. And over again, South Carolinians have said that if a patient, in consultation with a physician, if they both decide and the physician says that cannabis can treat this specific condition, there is no reason whatsoever that the state of South Carolina ought to interfere with that relationship. This particular bill is the work product of all these gentlemen and ladies behind me. It got support from leaders in the Democratic and Republican parties. It cuts across geographic, sex, age, all sorts of lines. This is a compassionate care bill. It's about providing relief to those who desperately need it. And before I conclude my remarks and introduce you to my colleague, Peter McCoy, who is going to be the primary sponsor of this bill in the House, I want to share with you the most compelling reason why we need to pass this law. It's because of the families' lives it's going to change. It's because of the patients' lives it's going to change. Now, I'm going to read out loud to you the only conditions for which medical cannabis can be authorized for use by a physician. And so when you hear somebody saying no, that they don't want this, imagine them saying no to somebody who has one of these conditions, because that's what they'd be doing. It's not a very long list. Cancer, multiple sclerosis, neurological diseases, PTSD, glaucoma, Crohn's disease, sickle cell anemia, wasting syndrome, severe nausea in people who are on hospice care, chronic medical conditions that cause severe muscle spasms, like multiple sclerosis, or a chronic and debilitating disease for which an opioid is currently prescribed by a physician. If a physician believes that cannabis could be of medicinal benefit to somebody who suffers from those conditions, who are we to say no? Who are politicians to say no? Who is law enforcement to say no? This bill is all about empowering physicians to deliver care that they take an oath to provide to their patients. That's what this bill does, and that's why this bill is going to pass. Now I'm going to introduce you to my friend Peter McCoy to share a few thoughts on the House side.
Thank you, Senator Davis. I want to welcome everybody to the South Carolina State House, and before we even get started here, I want y'all to take a good look behind me. Look at the folks who are standing behind me right now. There are veteran lawmakers and there are new lawmakers. There are Republican lawmakers and there are Democrat lawmakers. We've all come together because this is a South Carolina issue. It's time to put people first, patients first. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how this bill, Senator Davis did a great job of touching about what it does and how it will help impact South Carolinians immediately. From a personal standpoint, many of you all know my story. I've had a daughter, my oldest daughter, who had some severe epilepsy issues at the age of 6 months old. Now, folks, I've been there. I have held the hands of an infant that I could do nothing for, who was having seizure after seizure after seizure. Who are we, as Senator Tom Davis just told us, who are we to stand in front of helping people in need? This is a bill about helping others. Now, I spent a lot of my legal career as an assistant solicitor, and I found nothing more fulfilling than being a criminal prosecutor. But again, in working with law enforcement, just like we've done with this bill, but this bill, again, I understand will meet some resistance, but it's about helping South Carolinians. And who are we to stand in the way of helping South Carolinians that need desperate attention? Folks, again, I'm going to emphasize, I've been there, I've done that. I've held the hand of an infant who was having seizures, and there was nothing I could do. And it was the most helpless feeling that I've ever experienced in my life. And I hope that many of you never have to feel that. But if a medical doctor can provide help and provide assistance, let's do it. It's simple. It's easy. Let's all work together on this. Now, again, I've talked a little bit about my background as a criminal prosecutor, and I've talked about how working with law enforcement is so critical. And what I hear a lot of times with this bill is, hey, Peter, listen, this is great. I look forward to it. I want to help people in South Carolina, but in every other state, it just leads to recreational use. I'm here to tell you that I'm not for recreational use. I'm here to tell the folks that are out here right now that I don't think the folks standing behind me are for recreational use. This is for medicinal purposes only, and this is for helping South Carolinians. I cannot stress that enough. Senator Tom Davis also told you this bill has been vetted for a long time. This is not the first time this legislation has been drafted, not the first time it's been introduced, and it's not the first time that it will receive hearings in the subcommittee and the full committee process. I am very excited about what I've heard, the momentum I've seen about getting started with this process and hearings and having a full discussion on the issues on the House floor and the Senate floor. But I want to thank everybody for being here with me. This coalition of legislators are some of the finest people that I've ever worked with in my legislative career. It's an honor to stand here with each and every one of you, and I look forward to moving this bill forward. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Any questions? Any particular questions about the bill? For those of you in the media, I have some bullet points behind here that I'll pass out afterwards that'll summarize the highlights of the bill, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have at this time. It includes chronic pain if it is associated with conditions that cause severe muscle spasms, including multiple sclerosis. And again, the last paragraph, a chronic or debilitating disease for which an opioid is currently or could be prescribed by a physician based on generally accepted standards of care. Let me tell you why that's important. For the last 20 years or so, the conditions that could be successfully mitigated with cannabis have been treated with opioids. Opioids have been distributed, and we don't have to talk about, everybody knows about the epidemic we're facing right now. But talking about the opioid crisis is empty unless you have a solution. And if you've got something like cannabis that can address the things for which opioids are prescribed now by physicians, why would you not do that? Why would you force somebody, a veteran with PTSD, or somebody in chronic pain, why would you force them to take opioids when they could take cannabis to mitigate that pain? Why would you force them to do that if a physician, in consultation with the patient, says, cannabis is the best way for you to deal with your chronic pain? I don't want to prescribe these opioids to you, but I have to because the politicians up in Columbia say, all you can take for this is opioids. You can't take cannabis. That's nonsensical. This is about empowering doctors. This is about doctors being able to help their patients. And look, this is something that is recognized by the medical community. In January 2017, the American Academy of Sciences says there is conclusive evidence, the highest degree of evidence possible, that cannabis has this medicinal benefit. They reviewed 10,000 scientific abstracts before reaching that conclusion. This is not something that isn't documented. And that's why you've got 33 states that have already fully legalized medical, along with the District of Columbia. That's why between 70 to 80% of South Carolinians want doctors to be able to authorize cannabis use by their patients. It's because these things are true. These things are facts. There's no reason whatsoever for us to stand in the way of what a doctor thinks is in a patient's best interest.
Senator Davis, it's my understanding that smoking is not part of this bill. Can you elaborate on that, what is acceptable and
Right. That's correct. And that is an effort by us in good faith to reach out to the law enforcement community. When I met with Chief Keel last year, he and I sat down at length and talked about the bill. And look, I've got nothing but respect for Chief Keel. He just comes at this from a different perspective than I do. He has different life experiences, and I respect that. But I sat down and talked with him and asked him, what are some of the things about this bill that you find most objectionable? How can we make it a bill, not that you'll like or not that you'll support, but that you think is at least better? And that's where we develop things like SLED oversight and the seed-to-sale tracking technology and things of that nature, SLED background checks. Okay, but we also talked about the smoking of cannabis because he pointed out, quite rightly, that the way people consume cannabis recreationally is to smoke it. Okay, whether it's a joint or a bong or whatever it is, that's the way they consume it recreationally. And so he had a problem with that. Now, whether it was just the optics of it or whether or not it was confusing medicinal use with recreational use, I don't know what it is, but it was an accommodation that I was willing to make because there are other forms of consuming cannabis that can't be confused with that recreational consumption. And so again, this bill, as Peter pointed out, this is the product of many, many hours of subcommittee hearings, listening to law enforcement concerns, and whenever they have been specifically addressed to me or to us, we have worked to incorporate them, and the door remains open. The bottom line is, I want a bill that gets passed, and I want a bill that allows doctors to put medicine in the hands of patients who desperately need it. That's what I want. I think that he will. I think that once he sees this bill, it's just read across the desk today, so in fairness to the governor, he hasn't a chance to review this. But when he sees this bill, and when he sees the safeguards that have been built in, and when he sees the bright line that's been drawn between medical use and recreational use, and when he sees the degree of involvement that physicians have to have in the process, and that a physician has to certify in writing that a debilitating condition could be treated with cannabis. And when he sees all the monitoring and all the supervision and DHEC and SLED's involvement, and when he recognizes that of the 33 states that have medical cannabis laws, that this is going to be the most strictly regulated and socially conservative, yet still putting medicine in the hands of people who need it, I'm saying right now, I think Governor McMaster signs it. The Governor McMaster I know is not going to stand in the way of patients getting the care they need in a system like that. What happens is they have to, first of all, they don't get the cannabis unless they meet with a physician, and the physician does a diagnosis, and the physician says, okay, you have one of these specific conditions for which cannabis can be authorized, and I believe that cannabis can be of benefit. Okay, once a patient has that written certification from the physician, that patient can then submit an application to DHEC along with other information, background information, birth, residence, other personal information, application form, and then DHEC then gives a registry card to a qualifying patient. And at that point in time, the patient could then take the doctor's authorization to a dispensary. Now, it's important to point out that there are different classes of licensing in this bill. You have cultivation centers that are licensed, you have processing centers that are licensed, and dispensaries that are licensed, okay? And they're each monitored, and they each get to become licensed by submitting criteria to DHEC, having SLED background checks, having all sorts of due diligence being done before they get those licenses. One other thing I should point out in this bill that makes it unique, I think, in regard to other states, or many other states, is that there is a requirement that an independent lab be involved to test the cannabis throughout the process, both to ensure that it's safe for human consumption, but equally important so that the cannabis is properly labeled, the THC to CBD ratios, because the cannabinoids in cannabis interacts with the cannabinoids in the human body different ways for each individual. And some ratios of THC to CBD might work for somebody, but might not work for somebody else. So we're very strict about labeling this so that physicians have the ability to customize exactly what is a medicinal benefit to this patient. I would say that South Carolina is not Washington or Oregon or California. South Carolina is a very socially conservative state. I recognize that. The polls that have been conducted over the last 3 years consistently show that. A state is ultimately going to pass a law that I think is reflective of what their people's values are. I know what South Carolinians' values are. They want a medical cannabis program. They want patients to have relief that doctors say will benefit them, but they don't want recreational. And at the end of the day, that's the answer. It's because South Carolinians are not Californians or Coloradans. They're South Carolinians. Nothing further. I appreciate very much. I thank everybody behind me for showing up, and I look forward to a successful 2019. Thank you.